everybody. Welcome to Dive Deep. I'm Shelby Cornett. I'm the ministry assistant at Cambridge City Christian Church, and I'm with Danny, our lead pastor.
I didn't get the
I'm slacking on my
Yeah,
art
I know. You must
movements.
be tired
I'm
today.
tired.
Those
Got up
kids are
early.
really taking it out of you, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They do
Constantly.
that.
Yeah, they do.
They do that. Yeah.
Which I will say, Jackson made it until 5 o'clock this morning before he ended up in our bed.
Okay.
That's pretty good for him.
Okay. So you got to sleep in a little bit.
I did. Well, I got up at 3 and checked on him because he was making noises, but he was asleep. I guess he was just dreaming. So.
Yeah.
But it is what
You're
it is.
here.
I'm here.
You're alive.
I'm alive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Barely,
You've got
but
your
I'm
questions.
alive.
So.
Yep, I have questions.
Mm-hmm.
So this week, we're in Nehemiah
Yep.
still.
Yep. This was the fourth in the series, I believe. Fifth, maybe the fifth one in the
And
series.
there's 6, right? There's 6.
Six. So this was the fourth week. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll have a message this Sunday on Nehemiah. Then we'll take a week off because we have graduation Sunday, and then we'll finish up the week after. So,
Okay.
yep.
And we talked about fighting
Yeah.
and
Stand up and fight, or stand up and
Yeah.
defend, or the sermon was stand up and
I was going to
defend.
say, I couldn't
but
remember what the sermon title was.
It was stand up and defend, but I did use the word fight in this sermon a lot. What'd you think about that?
And there was a sword.
I
It was
did.
weird. I was sitting in the front row this week.
Yeah. Did you
and-
feel too close to that sword?
A little bit.
Were you afraid I might drop it?
You whipped that sword out.
That's
I was
right.
Like, whoa.
Yeah.
Hope you don't drop
I
it.
know. It's like we used that sword a few years ago for a sermon series, and so I've been waiting for an opportunity to bring it out of retirement,
Yeah.
and it came up this last week.
It was
so I was
a good
excited.
one to use it for.
Yeah, it was.
You should have wore it on your side during the sermon.
Yeah.
That
What
would've
was
been
that
funny.
movie? Was it Napoleon Dynamite? I think that he did that. Didn't he have it on his side or something?
I think
I think
did
it
at
was.
one
I
point.
watched that movie the other night. I don't know what it is.
that movie.
I'm going way off track here, but that movie, it's so weird, but it's like
It's like the dumbest thing I've
it
ever
is,
seen in my life.
but I've
The word you're looking for is genius.
okay, a
Genius.
genius, weird genius, and I know
Yeah.
many watching this probably don't even know the movie, and
But
I
our
don't.
church is promoting.
I wouldn't suggest it just for multiple reasons, but one of them is it's just weird. Most
Yeah.
people, and if you're probably, and this is take no offense, but if you're older than me, you're probably not going to get a lot of the references that are in it. So there was probably some I didn't get. So, but anyway,
It is really
so
funny.
yeah, wow,
So
that has to be the worst sidetrack I've ever committed in a sermon and a podcast, whatever. I apologize, Shelby. I have totally sullied this podcast.
We
Please forgive me.
went from talking about biblical stuff to Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah, I know. We
It's
really,
like complete opposite.
yeah, we really went downhill there, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I'm going to want to watch that movie later now.
Okay,
But-
I'm sorry.
Anyways, we were talking about defending.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so whenever you start talking about fighting or defending yourself, in the Christian faith, there's just something that's kind of icky about that, right?
Mhm.
Because we know that Jesus talked about when somebody, does something mean, you should forgive them or turn the other cheek, and so this idea that you should stand up and fight and defend is a hard one to kind of get your mind around. And I mean, we looked in the text, and what we realized, I don't think it's the same kind of fighting in terms of punching somebody in the face or something like that. It's stand your ground in your faith. Stand your ground when you have adversaries that are trying to take away God's mission in your life, and we all have those people, and some of them aren't. They aren't so easy to see sometimes.
Mhm.
Like they can be subtle, and they can even be people close to us that love us, but they don't have a positive influence on us. So that was kind of what I was getting at is watch out for those people in those circumstances that might try to pull you away from the restoration that Christ is trying to do in our lives.
Mhm.
We do have to fight for ourselves sometimes, not in a selfish, self-centered way. We fight because we want God's will to be accomplished, and that's what those in Jerusalem with Nehemiah were doing. It was God's will for the city to be rebuilt. He had sent Nehemiah there, and And so Nehemiah's like, no, we're not going to let these guys, these people groups who are around him to stop him from accomplishing that will.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was kind of icky, but I think it's an important
Yeah.
message because I think sometimes we don't fight for our faith. We just kind of, I don't know, keep our mouths shut sometimes. We don't. And then the other part of it is we let things slide. And then when we let things slide, then we find ourselves in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Our walk away from faith, a lot of people, unfortunately, we've seen through the years walk away from their faith. It hardly ever happens overnight. It's one little thing after one little thing. And then after a period of a while, it's a lot of things.
Right.
And so we have to be mindful of that and stand up and defend.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
One of the things I wrote down was just kind of a thought, not a question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, the fighting part is easiest, but the building is harder. If that makes any sense at all.
Makes total sense because I think that our nature, and that's what Jesus was speaking to when he talked about turning the other cheek. Our nature is to defend.
Mm-hmm.
Our sinful nature is to stand up for ourselves, to put our own interests first, to stand and to fight back. And so I can understand why you're coming from that. And with the building part, the reason why you're not good at building, and very few people are, is because it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy in the moment to fight somebody, like, just like that, you can fight
Right.
somebody. But to build something takes a lot of work and
Mm-hmm.
effort and time and planning and everything else. So, and you need help. And
Yeah.
we've talked about that a lot in this series, is getting the right people to help us. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why.
Mhm.
So
think
what
that's-
you're saying there isn't any different, I think, than most of us.
Yeah. Like, I think that's hard right now, too, because I like to think that I'm a pretty loving and understanding person,
Mhm.
but I also have my beliefs, I guess, and
Yeah.
especially on Facebook. That's what I was thinking about
Mhm.
for part of this sermon. Is like, sometimes it's so hard for me to keep my mouth shut on
Oh,
Facebook.
Yeah. And going back to your comment there, I mean, so let's just pick on Facebook, social media here for a second. I mean, this is really a general thing in life. But I mean, when you go on Facebook, how many comments? So if you were to do a proportional thing, I think most comments are kind of neutral, but how many of them are the type of comments that are building people up and how many are tearing them down?
Right.
You
Well,
know,
there's more
yeah.
negative than
Yeah. I mean, I think I've told you this. I mean, I've kind of stepped away from social media.
Mhm.
I look at it on my computer desktop maybe once or twice a week for like
Mhm.
5 minutes now, just to check in and look at things. I took it off my phone, and let me tell you, it's been great.
Yeah.
It was hard to do it at first because I'd been kind of addicted. I will admit,
Mhm.
every 30 minutes I'm looking at my phone. It's been awesome. I have a lot more time in my life, and
Yeah.
I'm not as negative because I don't see all this stuff,
Yeah.
on Facebook. So, yeah, I mean, we see it. That's a microcosm
Right.
of it right there on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
As far as the text we talked about
Mm-hmm.
on Sunday, so people were mocking the ones who were rebuilding Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Like, why did they not want that to happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Sanballat was the first person that's mentioned, and he was a Samaritan, or Samaritan. We read a lot about the Samaritans in Jesus' time. Remember one of the parables, the Good Samaritan? And the reason Jesus used the Samaritans was because the Samaritans and the Jews were blood enemies, okay?
Mhm.
Now, what I mean by that is that the Samaritans were half Jew and half other people groups, or part Jew, I should probably say, because maybe some were more half than others, but whatever. But what had happened is after Jerusalem had been destroyed, which was around 100 or so years before Nehemiah, the Samaritans had decided to intermarry with other people groups
Mhm.
around the area there, whereas the Jews had stayed mostly, quote unquote pure, like they married within their own,
Mhm.
their own ethnicity. So the Jews, because they thought you shouldn't intermarry, and the Bible said that in the
Mhm.
Old Testament, that they just did not like one another. So there was just they didn't like one another piece.
Mhm.
The other part of it was economics. So as long as Jerusalem was doing well, Samaria would not do as well. So it was family and blood. Two of the things that or family and money. Two of the things that cause the most fights between people. It was no different than like it is now.
Okay.
So that was it. But there were other groups too. Tobiah was an Ammonite, and then it spoke of some other people groups. They just didn't want them to get strong.
To succeed.
That's a good way of saying it, because same thing happens in our lives. We have people when we succeed, they're kind of they'll fail. Let's discourage them, and that's kind of what happened in the story. So
I was like, why are they're just rebuilding a city? Like, why is that such a big deal? And then that makes sense.
It wouldn't seem like one, but when you are a neighboring group and it can affect your pocketbook and it could affect your power in the area,
that led to the last thing I wrote down. So you talked about how Nehemiah was praying for the destruction of those going against God's will. And that made me wonder if I've ever prayed for destruction without realizing it. With my prayers, what I want for my life or someone else's life, does that require destruction somewhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did bring that up briefly on Sunday because of all the content with this message. I didn't really dig into that a whole lot, but that prayer is kind of a problematic one. Because again, we go back to what Jesus said about loving your enemies. Well, here's Nehemiah praying for the destruction of a people group, right? I mean, that's pretty much what he was praying for. But again, what I mentioned on Sunday was that he was praying that because they stood in opposition to God's will. So it wasn't like he was praying for their destruction because, hey, I hate those guys and God zap them, It was because they stood in the way of God's will being accomplished. And in our lives, I don't think there's anything wrong with us praying the same. If there is somebody in our life that has hurt us, that is keeping us from growing in our faith, if we can, and this is where it gets hard, if we could somehow remove our personal feelings for instead focus on God's plan, if we're praying in for God's will, I think that's an okay prayer to pray. But if you're praying just out of hatred or jealousy, somebody cuts you in line at the grocery store and you say a prayer, Lord, bring fire down upon them for putting their cart in front of mine. I don't think that's what Nehemiah was doing. It was about God's will. His focus was on God's will, and he didn't want God's will to be stopped. And so he asked for these people to be stopped.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that's a hard one.
I know. It made me think back about if I've ever done that on accident.
Like
That
how?
makes any
How would
sense.
you, like how?
Like if something I've prayed for to benefit someone is negatively affecting someone else and I don't think about it that way.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why it's important to just ask for God's will to be done, like Jesus did in the Lord's Prayer, because when you do that, you're leaving it up to God to decide who gets what, right? I mean, he doesn't cause evil against anyone, but he does allow it. So as long as you're praying for God's will, then you're not putting yourself in that position to decide who should get what. So, yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I had. Was there anything else you wanted to talk
No.
about? from
I
Sunday?
mean, it was this was a good text. Nehemiah, I've always loved Nehemiah. Nehemiah, something I would just say to those, maybe if somebody's watching and you're in leadership, Nehemiah is perhaps, trying to think through my head back through all the different biblical books, but I mean, Nehemiah is probably the best book in maybe even in the whole Bible when it comes to looking for leadership principles. We see a lot of leadership stuff in this book. I have a book that's helping me in my preparation that was given to me when I was in college years and years ago. That was it was from a leadership class that I took, but it was but it used Nehemiah. And it's kind of interesting to read through it and see these principles and what he does and how he reacts to opposition like we saw in this message. I would really encourage you, if you're a leader, to really take a maybe after the series is over, go back and look at it from a leadership perspective. And there's a lot that you can learn from this.
Yeah.
I know I have.
I've liked this book a lot.
Yeah. I had somebody mention to me this week after church on Sunday, that service on Sunday, that that what they like about our church and our messages is that we do spend some time on the Old Testament too. Because I think a lot of churches kind of avoid it because it is sometimes hard to understand. But I'll tell you, the Old Testament just makes the New Testament so much more wonderful. I mean, so much richer. And so we do try to do that. I usually try to do an Old Testament, at least one Old Testament, New Testament book or section of a book every year, because I just think there's so much to be learned. So, yeah, it's been good.
So this week is what?
Yeah, so this week we're talking, I know the last week we're talking about prayer, and then this week is, you caught me off guard here.
I just wrote it down too. And
Yeah,
can't
I know.
remember.
I've been working on it, but I can't. I'm trying to remember myself. But this week is about helping other people rebuild while you're rebuilding yourself. And I think this is a good one again this week, because sometimes when you're in the rebuilding process, you can forget that you're also there to help others rebuild. It's a team effort. So that's what we'll take a look at this week. What that
knew that.
means. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
So make sure you guys watch this Sunday, or come to church, or whatever you
Online, or
do.
watch it whenever you watch it. Yeah.
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 and we talk about rebuilding others. And we'll see you next week.